I'm going to get started with some introductory slides and then we'll go right into our panel discussion as folks continue to arrive. So I'm Mara Yale. I facilitate this educational series and direct the Pediatric Stroke and Brain Injury Education Program. I work with many families and also in the Pediatric Stroke Clinic at Massachusetts General Hospital. I also help support cerebral palsy soccer New England, and maybe most importantly, I'm mother to two children, one of whom had a stroke at birth and is currently a high school athlete. So I'm super excited for today's topic and speakers. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so as you know, because you signed up to be here, we're talking about how to support high school athletes. And really, in particular, we're focused on high school athletes who may have physical disabilities that are less visible or less obvious to mainstream coaches. And how do we support the athletes as parents, as coaches, and as administrators? Just to orient you to this educational series, we come with this partnership between parents and healthcare providers at Mass General Hospital and Spalding Rehab Hospital, but we partner with people all over the world. And those of you with the lived experience or working with kids with this lived experience know that stroke in infancy or childhood can affect the whole lifespan. As a disclaimer, this is educational. If you have specific healthcare needs, we really need you to seek out your providers. To highlight what we've done with this educational series, we've been building community for 5 years. We have something like 40 sessions up on our YouTube channel, some of them viewed thousands of times and many viewed hundreds of times. We reach an international audience. And as you'll see from today's speakers, we partner with experts from all around the country and the world. We've also started going to conferences to share this model of education. And I have been going into the pediatric stroke clinic to personalize the education for individual families for almost a year. So it's really wonderful to be able to listen to a clinic visit and say, oh, maybe you'll watch this video that would help you with this stage of journey that you're at. I'll put the links that I'm sharing here into the chat so you can follow them. We post all of our events on this website, ygsa.org, PD Stroke, and you can get to past recordings through there as well. We have 3 more events coming up after this one. We're focusing on cortical or cerebral visual impairment in March. And then we'll have an in-person event outside of Spalding Rehab, our 3rd annual Play to Thrive event for families, for those in the Boston or New England area. And then our final virtual event of this academic year is May 17th, focused on language development. And I'll share in the chat all of these resources that are from our different speakers today, so that you can follow them as well. And this will also be in the recording, which will be up on YouTube within about a week. All right, so I'm going to stop my share, and I'm very excited to introduce Ashley Hammond, who's going to lead us off. He'll introduce himself, but I just want to share that he, among many other roles, is head coach of the summer camp for cerebral palsy soccer, to which my child has been lucky to attend the past 3 summers. And it's really a highlight of our summer as a family to experience the magic of what Ash does leading that camp. And I think he'll share some of that spirit today.
Mara, thank you so much for that introduction, those very kind words. And as you know, I've spoken to you on numerous occasions. That's my magic week of the year where I get to hang out with some of the greatest human beings on the planet. And luckily, we get to do 2 or 3 camps now. So, real briefly, the head of Cerebral Palsy Soccer, which is a nonprofit organization that has striven to create um, accessibility to soccer and football over the country. We currently operate in about 17 cities. Our goal is to operate in every city, and the idea is to give kids with disabilities, specifically CP, stroke, or traumatic brain injury, an opportunity to play soccer. That's my and we have a nonprofit foundation called CP Soccer that we do that with. I also am the chairperson of U.S. Soccer's Disability Soccer Committee, so I represent to and for approximately 40,000 athletes across the U.S. that are disabled or have disabilities and play soccer, be they deaf, be they amputee, so on and so forth. And that's a lot of fun to do that at U.S. Soccer. I'm also a girls' high school coach in New Jersey. That's my love as well. My passion is still remains soccer, and I fortunately get to hang out with some of the best soccer players in New Jersey on a yearly basis at high school. And I get to do that also on a very large indoor sports facility. So I'm in that business too. So thank you so much for joining. And I was at the U.S. Soccer Annual General Meeting this past weekend down in Dallas, Texas, and what I took from that, which is what I take from the U.S. Soccer all the time. The president is actually a former professional player called Cindy Parlow Cone, and at every juncture, in every meeting, and everywhere we sit and meet and talk, and I had breakfast with her on Saturday, she always reiterates the same thing. There's a place for everybody in U.S. soccer. And I would like to make sure, and my message to everybody here and to everybody, be they a high school coach or a club coach, and I know specifically we're talking about high school here, is I believe there's a place for every athlete in high school. And it's kind of on that theme of there's a place for every group in U.S. soccer. I truly believe that there's a place for every athlete in high school. And I'm not only a person, obviously, I'm someone that cares a lot about that, but I don't only speak those words, I do those words. And so, as each year of my life as a high school coach has gone on, I've regularly had athletes with disabilities ask if they can play high school soccer, and we've always found a home for them. And sometimes it's not as a player, sometimes it's as a manager. We last year I had two managers, both with disabilities. One of my athletes had Down syndrome. She actually was a manager for 3 years, went on to play in her final year with me. And then another young woman, Jessica Kunkin, who had other disabilities, and she ended up not playing for 4 years, but she was a manager for 4 years. And we've got various other athletes that play for us with disabilities. So the message, I think, is to me is very clear. There is a place for everybody in high school sports, even for athletes with disabilities. However, I would like to stress that for me, the one word that permeates our relationship with our athletes, be they able-bodied or otherwise, is respect. I respect my high school athletes, and I respect them whether they have a disability or not. And I think the stories that make the headlines are when schools have maybe an athlete with a disability and they allow them to score a goal. And that may work for some people, it may work for others. It doesn't work for me. My athletes, be they whoever my athletes are that I coach and train, we're gonna have a great time. But I think out of respect to them, they're just a part of my team, and I just treat them as a part of my team. And that's how I deal with my athletes, again, regardless of their abilities or whatever they are. And I think that's a very important message. And I think you meet the athlete where they are. I was regular communication with my athletes' families about their daughters and what they were comfortable with, what they were not comfortable with, whether they wanted to play, whether they didn't want to play. And that's how I conducted myself. I think it's really important that as parents, as people involved in working with kids playing in high school, that the first protocol has to be the coach. And obviously, I'm a very willing and able coach who's prepared to, if you like, do that. But I think telling a coach or demanding of a coach or requiring of a coach that they do this work is, I think that's a very difficult approach. I think the better approach when you work with high school coaches is, like I say, it's discussion. It's, how can I help you help this athlete? How can I help you help my daughter? How can I help you help my son? there are lots and lots of situations where athletes around the countries with disabilities play in high school in various sports. And much like a lawyer, whenever we see a lawyer in a court case and they cite the case from way back when and way back when, I think what my message to you here is today is there are resources for us to help you. And rather than walking through the door of a high school coach's office and saying, how could, I want to do this, work with us first. There are plenty of people like myself and like Mara and Shay and plenty of people on this call today that have great guidance and advice before you do that. And so my message to you all as parents, as educators, or whatever is you don't need to reinvent the wheel as it relates to having a successful athlete with a disability playing in high school. And if you try to reinvent the wheel, that's great. But like most things in life, if you're willing to take on board a few little tips here and there, we think it can be a better experience, because there's nothing worse than having a negative high school experience, where I believe that we are capable of, as a family, of having a positive experience. So I'm not going to say too much more, because I could answer lots of questions. I advocate for athletes across the country. I'll give you a really good example of something we did. I think that's one of our highlight stories at US Soccer. As the chairman, I get a lot of calls. And one of the calls I got was from a family in Pennsylvania who have a young daughter that they adopted from India, and she has dwarfism. And by the time she got to 11, she was no longer able to keep up with her 11-year-old peers. She was actually having a real difficult time at 10. And historically, soccer across this country is very rigid about their age groups. So what did I do? I called US Soccer's legal department and said, what's the precedent for allowing kids to play at a younger age? They said it doesn't happen. I said, well, can we make it happen? And they asked me for the circumstance. And I said, what if can I have this young girl? She wants to stay in able-bodied soccer for at least another couple of years. Can she, as an 11-year-old, play in the U10 division? And then as a 12-year-old playing the U11. At that point, we'll worry about the problem down the road. I went to the head of Pennsylvania Youth Soccer. I sat them down. I sat with the club coach, and we negotiated this young player onto another team a year down for another year. And she ended up playing 3 years down. This is a couple of years ago. And that happened because we talked about it and we came up with a logical solution. And that's the kind of thing that we have to do in high school too. We have to work through what's it like to have an athlete in high school playing soccer, and how do we do that? So I got my little timer on. I don't want to hear the music playing to brush me off stage. But if you have any questions for me, I don't know whether we're doing Q&A first. Mara will tell us. But thank you so much for joining. And just remember, there's a place for every athlete in high school to play sport.
We'll take questions in the chat, and we'll get to them after the four speakers each have a chance to introduce themselves. Maybe you'll introduce Shay briefly, Ash.
Yes, the reprobate that's sitting on the stage. I'm just kidding, son. I love you dearly. The young man, Shay Hammond, is my son, Shay Hammond, 21 years of age, studying down at Clemson University, and plays for the U.S. Men's Paralympic National Team. Shay is a left hemi, and diagnosed at around 4 or 5 with us as my wife and I. And our life took a left turn when we found out that Shay had CP, but he was determined not to take the left turn with us. He just carried straight on, and we're extremely proud of his accomplishments and his attitude. And I think you'll understand why once you hear him speak. Shay.
Thank you, Dad. Appreciate. Oh, wait, am I? Yes. Oh, that was.
You're good.
Spread. I am on mute. Hello, everyone. My name is Shay Hammond. I'm a player for the U.S. Cerebral Palsy men's national team. I'm a 2-time bronze medalist, so got my medals out in the Parapan American Games, which I returned from last November, where we won our 2nd bronze medal against Venezuela. I am also a recipient of Team USA's Service and Hope Award back in 2021 for my work with CP Soccer, as I am the head coach of our summer camp. Dad's title is camp director, so I like to make that clear a little bit. I like to coach Echo. Dad oversees everything, not to steal his thunder too much. As my dad said, I am a current student here at Clemson University with aspirations to receive my master's in communications. I find out in the next week or two if I stay in the graduate program. And I'm an athlete with cerebral palsy. I have left-sided hemiplegia. I suffered a stroke when I was born in utero, and I was diagnosed at the age of 6. And I've dealt with physical therapy, growing up playing sports, dealing with having cerebral palsy, being in able-bodied athletics, being out of able-bodied athletics, and everything that you can imagine that you either experience as a parent of a child with a disability, or as a coach of an athlete with a disability, or an administrator with an athlete or person with a disability under your care. So I've been through it all, I've experienced it all, I've seen it all, even though, yes, I am only 21. So a little bit about my high school career, because I'm going to try to keep it around the high school age and things like that. I transferred into a brand new high school in my town. I went to a public high school for the entirety of my life up until private school, which then I was in a brand new school playing for a brand new team with a bunch of people that I didn't know. And thankfully, the coach knew my situation beforehand, but he didn't quite know the extent of my situation. So as I enter it, I had to really self-advocate. That was the most important part that I learned within the first months of playing for this coach and for this team, was that I had to self-advocate. I had to self-advocate for myself to my teammates. So I had to explain, hey, listen, if you play to my left foot, there's a solid chance I might not be able to control the ball. I had to self-advocate to my coach, saying, hey, listen, doing double days 5 days a week just isn't going to work for me. I'm going to fatigue out by the end of the week, and my leg is not going to be able to keep up. I had to self-advocate in that way. I also had to self-advocate, though, for myself. And I had to tell myself, listen, sometimes you have to buck up and get it done, right? Sometimes the teams are going to have that many practices. Sometimes the teams are going to have a very demanding schedule. And it is up to me to be able to handle that if I want to compete, if I want to stay in the program. Now, again, I play currently at a very elite level for an athlete with a disability. And if your son, daughter, whoever, or child that's under your care wants to aspire to be at an elite level, that's what it's going to take. It's going to take a lot of self-advocacy. And that's one thing that I would stress the most to teach the people under your care and teach these young athletes and young students is how to self-advocate, how to speak and form relationships, how to work out extensions and things like that with teachers, how to work out extensions and things like that on workouts, whatever it might be. Teaching your young athletes how to self-advocate is by far and away the most important thing, because at the end of the day, it comes down to us. When I turn 18, 19, 20 in 20 years, I'm not going to have someone having to tell me to keep my foot down, unfortunately, with my dad, who we did it every single day growing up. I'm going to have to tell myself, hey, keep my foot down, even though I'm 45 years old, and I'll have to tell myself that for the rest of my life. So self-advocacy is the number one thing to teach high school athletes, but also athletes of younger ages and athletes of any age or people of any age with a disability. Now, for what you can do as an administrator or as a coach or whatever else to help support your athlete, from my perspective, if they are unable to self-advocate, or if they're still learning, if they're shy, if they're nonverbal, whatever it may be, listen to them as best you can. Pull them aside and say, hey, listen, what do you need? How can I help you succeed? Without giving you everything that you need. Without giving you everything that you want. What do you need versus what do you want? And really try to figure out those differences, because as my dad spoke about before, you don't want to treat someone very differently. You want to keep the consistency across the board. You want to keep everyone feeling the same, reacting the same, however it is, but you also need to make sure that it's an equal playing field, right? So it's finding that fine line, balancing that fine line of, hey, bringing it up to equal, but not just giving someone everything, because that's one of the biggest problems for people growing up with a disability, is that they get coddled, right? I mean, thankfully it didn't happen to me, and I was able to achieve a great deal of success because of that. And I highly recommend to all people who care for individuals with disabilities, you gotta teach independence. So that's kind of my spiel for how to deal with athletes getting into the high school age and things like that. I'm open to any questions about my career as an athlete with a disability, or any questions regarding what else I did for as a high school athlete, what I did extra, what I didn't do extra, and all the above. So I will pass it along to either the Q&A or whoever is next.
All right. I think that's me. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Ash and Shay. Always love listening to you guys tell your story and about the work you do. I'll give you a quick introduction, and then I'm going to kind of flip the script a little bit here and actually show some slides and talk through a few things related to fitness. So my name is Jenna Murray Rosenthal. I'm actually a speech and language pathologist and a certified brain injury specialist by trade. I'm also a certified level 2 CrossFit trainer and what we call an adaptive and inclusive trainer. So I'm going to tell folks a little bit about adaptive fitness and what that is. I run a program here in Boston called Fit to Function, in which we use functional fitness to help individuals with neurological disabilities, acquired or congenital, move better and have better sort of functional existence, whether that's what they're doing in everyday life. It could be targeted towards a specific sport. So I'm going to just talk through a little bit about what we mean when we say adaptive training and how that can kind of be applied to help your high school athletes in their specific sport. So I am going to attempt to share my screen. I am not very good at this, so bear with me. Share screen. This. Perfect. Oops. All right. So just really briefly, I just want to talk about access and adapting and sort of what that means. So brief definition in terms of how we describe what we call an adaptive athlete, because that's not a phrase that is commonly known or shared. But when we think about what that means, an adaptive athlete is an individual with some sort of permanent impairment, right? And that causes a limitation. This is something that can be seen, it's observable and measurable, whether it's physical or cognitive, and it affects their work capacity. And by work capacity, we mean how we do things in everyday life. So if you have some sort of a limitation, whether it be lower, you're in a, sort of seated, you're in a wheelchair, or you have a hemiplegia and it changes the way you do real world tasks, it's going to affect your work capacity to do those tasks, but also the way that you can do things in fitness or in sport. I'm going to talk a little bit about why that matters. Come on. Doesn't want to, there we go. So a lot of words on the screen, not something that you need to go through, but when we think about training, when we know what we know of our sports, we have our sport specific training, right? If you're playing soccer, you go to soccer practice, you work on the things related to the sport itself. But there are general physical skills and traits that are required for all sport and to have good capacity within your chosen sport. And a lot of times our practice will include skills and drills and maybe weight training. And it's because we're trying to get at this high range of things that we're asking of an athlete, right? You need to have stamina, you want to have flexibility, you want to have that balance and coordination that goes with some of the more minutia tasks of each sport. So when we're thinking about training and practice, whether it's really in the forefront for a coach or an athlete or not, we're targeting all of these skills. So, but why am I talking about this and why does it matter? When we think about fitness and we think about access to fitness, we want to be thinking about the movements that we're asking an individual to do. So this is more related to sort of training in a gym, which supports all of the things that then our athletes are doing out there on the field or on the court, right? So we have general movement patterns that we look at in everyday training, and that's pushing and pressing, pulling, squatting, hinging, and locomotion. And as you can see, there are exercise examples there for what these things are. So pushing, something like a push-up, pulling a pull-up, right? A squat is a squat, a hinge is a deadlift, or picking up weight off the floor, right? And then we think about how we move through space. So if we're thinking about our adaptive athletes and the sports that they're playing and the ways that they're doing things, we want to be clear, what's the pattern that we're asking of this individual? And is there an exercise that maybe they can't do the way that everybody else does? And this is where it comes down to access. So we think about the function of a movement, and this is what's going to help us adapt this for the athlete and make sure that they can still do the work within their own limitation, their changed work capacity, right? So really simple, there's some functional carryover to some of these things as well, right? Sometimes we look at something, we're like, what's the purpose of doing this, right? Like even a deadlift, a lot of folks will be like, why do I have to deadlift, right? It's picking something up off the ground. That could be a bag of groceries. It could be a dog, right? It could be a friend who has fallen. A burpee is just falling, getting up off the ground, right? So we want to know sort of what is the thing we're doing? What's the function of it? How does it carry over into life? Because this is going to help us make sure that it's accessible to an individual regardless of their limitations. So the best way to kind of consider that, right, is to also know what is it that we're trying to accomplish with this task. So a push, for example, a push or a press is just moving your body or a load away from you, whereas a pull is moving your body or load to you, right? A squat is just how we move up and down. A hinge is how we move weight or load up and down, right? So, and locomotion is how we get across space. So this is not the same for everyone. So a really simple example when we think about adapting for someone's specific limitation or their own work capacity is if a squat moves our body up and down through space. So how do our seated or individuals in wheelchairs, how do these athletes move their body up and down? For them, it's going to be a dip, right? They use their arms to transfer up and down. So this is providing access to a particular movement pattern. And this becomes applicable when we think about sport and how we are training people in their specific sport. So if you, for example, have an athlete, we want to work on pushing or pulling, and they have hemiplegia and they have weakness on one side of the body, we might just change the load or the grip, right? So that unaffected side might be able to lift 20 pounds and the affected side might need to lift 10. But that's accessing, despite the limitation, to make sure that each part, all of the body parts are getting trained and giving access to whatever that movement pattern may be. Right? So coming back to sort of what is an adaptive athlete and why does it matter for all of our athletes here, we want to make sure that we're taking a look at what is that limitation and how does it affect the way they do things, and how can we ensure that they're able to do the things within their own capacity to help them sort of maximize their own potential and keep up with their peers. So you've already kind of heard mention of this, but a lot of this, when it comes back to how do we support our athletes, it all comes back to kind of that empowerment piece where we want to give individuals the tools that they need to help them succeed in any kind of fitness or sport setting. And a lot of that is about empowering our athletes, our teenagers, to know what are the things that they need to be successful in this environment. And this comes with quite a bit of learning, right? But we want to make sure, for example, if they have a specific limitation, that they have specific warm-ups for any of the things that cause them a little more trouble. Do they need to stretch out because of tone or spasticity? They need to spend a little extra time priming their system because of any sort of CNS vulnerability. Are there go-to movements that they'll always do? If everybody's always, for example, doing a barbell bench press, but they have a weakness on one side, maybe they're always using dumbbells with 2 different weights so that they can still access the movement. And these are tools we want to put into these individuals' hands. Advocacy is something you've heard a lot of, like helping folks to know what is their limitation and how do they adapt around it and how can they be successful, helps individuals to know how they can show up and speak for themselves, right? And then the last bit there, I just added get trained and trained others. One of the things I forgot to mention that I also am part of an organization called the Adaptive Training Academy, and we train trainers to train individuals with disability across fitness and sport context. So a lot of folks just don't know. A lot of coaches just don't know if they've never encountered a certain limitation. So as a way you can go out, there's an online course people can take and just kind of learn, hey, how do we do this? How do we adapt to movement? All right, I'm going to stop sharing there. That was my quick slideshow. So I will defer to questions now or later, but thanks y'all for having me and for listening.
Hi, everybody. Excuse me. Thank you, Mara. Thank you, Jen. My name's Joe Walsh. I'm the president of Adaptive Sports New England, which is a nonprofit based here in Boston, where we work within the Paralympic realm of sports, supporting youth and young adults who have either a physical disability or a vision impairment. I also am a person with a vision impairment. I'm legally blind and grew up that way. Grew up playing sports, everything from baseball to hockey to soccer, and didn't play on any teams in high school, but went on to learn how to cross country ski when I was in college, and earned my way onto the national team and skied in some international Paralympic competitions as a much younger version of myself. I've since then held numerous positions, including some leadership positions at the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee in the Paralympic division. And currently, in addition to my full-time job managing Adaptive Sports New England, I also serve on the board of directors for Move United, which is a national organization supporting individuals who have physical disabilities, and also on the International Blind Sports Federation. So with that as background, I'll talk a little bit about, what we do with Adaptive Sports New England and some of our interaction with high schools and high school athletes. My purpose here is to give you some examples of how to break down the barriers and get past the first answers, or initial reactions to inclusion of kids who have disabilities onto high school sports. We run localized programs. We have a wheelchair basketball program, swim lessons, a swim team, track program. We've coordinate with our friends at Community Rowing to do a rowing program and sailing. But we work, those programs are more specialized and work with kids who have disabilities, and we support their development and skill development there. But then we also coordinate with the Massachusetts Interscholastic Athletic Association, and numerous school districts where some of those kids attend school, and some of them also participate in school sports. So we have kids, currently there are kids who we work with who are currently or recently, there have been kids who we work with who are on the cross-country running team, who are blind, kids who race wheelchairs on their school track and field teams, kids who participate in field events, throwing events, on their high school teams. We have a couple of girls who row with us, but then are the coxswains on their high school teams. So there's a variety of different ways. We've had swimmers and tennis players and others all integrated into high school sports teams. So there definitely are ways of this happening. I'll start with the big hammer. For those of you who are, I'm presuming most of the people on the call are within the United States, and you're probably pretty familiar with Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which in the school setting introduces the fact that kids who have disabilities, or people who have disabilities, are entitled to the same opportunities as their peers without disabilities. That's an oversimplification, but that's some of the language that gets used. It's basically an access law. It allows individuals who have disabilities to be included into activities that the school runs, or other organizations that receive federal fundings run, and without discrimination. In 2013, the U.S. Department of Education that oversees Section 504 issued what they call a Dear Colleague letter, and Mars included the link to this resource in her resource page and put it in the chat. But it's a piece of guidance. What they say is guidance from the U.S. Department of Education, that the 504 applies to extracurricular activities, and in specific extracurricular athletics, so that kids who have disabilities are entitled to the same opportunities as kids who don't have disabilities. Now, this doesn't mean that every kid gets to play on a varsity team. There are definitely some restrictions or some limitations of that rule in the Dear Colleague letter. The competitiveness of a team is still a consideration for the school. and the school isn't required to change competitiveness as a requirement. But for instance, we had a kid who ran cross country who was legally blind, and he was solidly the second fastest in his school and on his team. But he couldn't run through the woods by himself. He couldn't effectively do that. So we managed to talk with the school and with the league and came up with a set of rules for how that student athlete could participate on the cross-country running team with a non-student running guide who wasn't a coach on the course, a guide, and could participate in that. And we came up with all the rules for that. And the MIAA, the High School Athletic Association, adopted those rules. So this kid got several years of running on the cross country team, and did very well. Went on to run for Division III college, where the NCAA adopted similar rules for running with a guide in Division III competition. So one of the key points in the Section 504 and what was ultimately happened at the NCAA as well is that the athlete has to be assessed as an individual. So just because somebody else got to race a wheelchair in the high school track program doesn't mean that everybody gets to race a wheelchair in the track program. There's each individual case needs to be assessed. And one reason, so my closing point here is to make sure that you're getting to have conversations about what these accommodations might look like early on. We generally start when we know that there's an athlete who's moving through the school system, who's likely to participate in a high school sport. We try to start that conversation certainly in 8th grade, if not before, with the school's principal and athletic director, where you really should start to get the administrative permissions or they're the ones who are most likely to be an advocate for the athlete, and then they can work with the specific coach to make sure that the coach understands that this is part of the role of the team, and some coaches inherently understand that. Others may need some convincing or some education along those lines, but we've always found coaches and administrators to be welcoming on this. They're all very interested in helping students, and if we can help them come up with solutions for inclusion, they generally are very excited about that opportunity. I think I'll leave it off there. Well, I'll say one more thing, and that is that it doesn't match for every kid to participate in any given sport. As a kid who is blind, I grew up playing baseball, and there isn't really a much of a worse match than a kid who's blind playing baseball. But because I wanted to be part of the team and that was the opportunity that I had, I stuck it out and I played baseball throughout my little league career. I didn't play in high school. The game was much too fast for that. But you can allow kids to participate in sports, even if it doesn't seem like they're going to go anywhere in that sport, and allow them to have the experience of being on the team and playing on a team and being part of with their friends, and then guide them to sports that might be better for them. Rowing is a much better sport for a kid who's blind because you're face backwards in the boat and you're not supposed to look side to side anyways, so you don't have to see. But picking a sport is an important element of a kid's success, whether that be in community sports or in school sports or beyond, or in just recreational sports in life. So I'll leave it there and turn it back over to Mara and accept any questions and now or later, if you've got anything that you think I can help you with.
Thank you so much, Joe and Ash and Shay and Jenna. So I've put us into the gallery. I'll invite everybody to come on camera if you're comfortable doing so. And I'm going to start with Tanya's question. I believe she may have had to leave. And if you want to ask a question, you can raise your actual hand, your digital hand, or type it. So Tanya's question was about her 6th grade son playing basketball and obvious right hemiplegia, but mild, and concerned about safety, playing with other athletes. They're unsure how to make it possible. Thoughts or suggestions? So I guess I'll start because I think it would come directly back to what Joe said at the end. It really depends on the sport. And it depends on the sport and the level of competitiveness of the sport, right? So is it a recreational team? Is it a club team? Is it an elite select team? So there are many different options. Does anyone have more to add, Shay? It looks like you do.
Yes, I'm gonna take a page out of my dad's book, and I'm gonna mention something that I'm sure Jenna would love to go to bounce off of as well. But a page out of my dad's book is our other co-founder, Eli Hallowell. That what I always hear them say, no matter whenever we give a year-end speech, whatever it is say yes. So if the player wants to play basketball, don't say, oh, you should do rowing, or you should do, sorry, not to knock rowing, but oh, you should do a non-contact sport or this because it's safer. That's not the right answer in my opinion as an athlete, because that's not what I want to hear. I want to hear, yes, you can play basketball. So then obviously the question is safety, because I don't agree with, oh, let's put him in another sport or anything like that. Obviously you want to create a safe environment. So I'll definitely allow Jenna to, because she's more experienced on this from the teaching side of things, is you want to teach your son the best ways to fall, the best ways to be physically prepared for the demands, the best ways to know what you're expecting moving forward. I know from my perspective as a soccer player, I have to use my hamstrings, my quads, my legs constantly for a tremendous amount of running, a tremendous amount of cutting side to side. And I really had to teach my left side how to move differently than my right because it couldn't keep up. So how do you find the little ways that you are able to move better? How do you strengthen the little muscles that maybe won't get the most activation through normal workouts and normal practices? And what extra work are you going to do to ensure, and this is for the athlete and for the parent as well, to encourage it, what extra work are you going to do to make your body more capable of the demands of playing basketball, physically, whatever it is. And then from the other side of things, this is just for myself and what I've learned playing soccer, is you got to learn how to fall because he's going to fall. You can't ensure a 100% safe environment, but you can be prepared for everything moving forward. You got to learn how to fall. Everyone at CB soccer sometimes will practice falling just because you have to learn how to fall, especially on a basketball court. You have to learn how to do all the different things that you're going to experience. You have to learn how to take a hit and not get thrown around. You have to learn how to move in between players. It's all about just replicating the game experience and replicating the practice experience as much as you possibly can, and understanding it's gonna take more work and being patient with that. And obviously, I'm sure Jen will have a lot to say on the training side of it and the actual what you can do. But so I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally jumping on that, Shay. I think that's a really great advice. And I think one of the things that sort of goes overlooked and can be sort of a double-edged sword in the disability space is I'm like everybody else. I want to do all the things everybody else is, and threading that line of, but there are ways that you do things that are different. And in order to protect yourself and perform the best, we need to train you to do things differently and well. And I know the first time I met Shay, he was talking about like running, right? He has a CNS vulnerability, which just means his capacity to run is not as high as someone else's, but that's not fitness. that's limitation. And so teaching our athletes, what are the things they can do to better prepare, given their limitations, to be the most successful in their sport. And it's hard when you have a kid that you want to say, no, you're not different. You're just like everybody else. Play basketball, play soccer, be like everybody else. And we do want that, but we also really need to ensure that we're empowering each child and athlete to be able to do the things to take care of themselves, to optimize and maximize their performance along with their safety. And so a lot of that is a little bit of specialized training off to the side, whether that's in fitness or extra soccer practice or extra skills and drills related to their limitations, the same way that any individual attacks sort of their weakness on a sport side, saying, this is the thing I have to look at and work on and know inside out. And Ash's hand is up, so I'm good. And I have enough. I've said enough. Go on, Ash.
You can keep on talking because I love listening to you, but I wanted to make sure I said something also. So as well as the physical preparedness, for me, one of the most important things is the emotional, mental preparedness as well. And what I mean by that is people are mean, and there's a tolerance level for players that are not very good, and players with disabilities, or players that are perceived as not as good as the other ones. And there's a certain tolerance level by both players and parents. But when you are consistently poor, or you consistently do things wrong, people are mean, and they do say things, and people shrug their shoulders. Oh, come on, comments from the audience, comments from whatever. Oh, that kid always falls over, or that kid always does this or always does that. Well, guess what? When you got CP, you're always going to the right if you're a left hemi, and you're going to fall over, and you're going to some hemis are going to shoot one-handed almost. They're actually going to, the physical limitations are not, as Jen so aptly put, it's not a fitness issue, it's a limitation issue. And I love the way she characterized the way to view that. Preparing your kid for that is important. I wrote once upon a time, and I called it like 9. Like, because I hate it when people say like out of context. I'm an advocate for my high school girls not saying like. I won't listen to my girls talk if they say like out of context. So I use that as a play on words. But like 9 to me it's like 9 when kids hit that brick wall. The vast majority of parents that I've interviewed, and I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of parents across the country, kids hit a physical brick wall at 9, where they, number one, they start to realize that they are disabled. Up until 9, it's unicorns and rainbows, and sometimes it's 8 and sometimes it's 10. So it's like 9, sometimes it's 8, sometimes it's 10. They unicorns and rainbows until they actually realize that they're actually disabled, and then the world is a very different place for them. And then people start to be mean to them when they're playing, and that's almost an immediate time and place where they leave the sport. And so 9 is that brick wall time. So you talked about a 6th grader, so they might still just about be hanging in there. The most important thing for me is not only the physical preparedness, but also the emotional preparedness, but also for the parents too, emotionally preparing themselves, because you go home at night and you cry. When I used to see Shay fall over all the time and gradually sort of dropping down, you cry a lot at night, but you can't show that. You got to be right there with them. And I know Shay didn't mention this, but I'll tell you what we did in our house. We had what's called a no pickup rule for Shay. My wife and I agreed we would never pick him up. And I still get emotional when I talk about the one instance where he tore his MCL and I stood over him and didn't pick him up. I said, you got to find your way off the field on your own steam here, kid. And we're going right to rehab. Well, no, Shay said to me, Dad, can you just take me to rehab tonight? We'll start rehab tonight. And I didn't pick him up. They carried him off and I refused to pick him up. And I'm not saying that works for every parent because it's hard, but be prepared emotionally because it's not an easy ride.
Melanie, what's your question?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for taking my question. So my daughter has no real physical disabilities, and to look at her, you can't tell that she has any disabilities. And so she's been playing sports throughout her life. She's very athletic. We were told she could have cerebral palsy, but she didn't. And so she has memory issues. So she struggles with instruction. She needs to hear things repeatedly over and over again. We've always had accommodations with nice coaching. The swim instructor let my husband get on deck right before she swam, and he'd repeat it to her like 1,000 times, and she'd take off and do it wrong, but then look around and see what she was supposed to do and did it right. And now we're in high school where she's actively in volleyball. She gave up soccer because of the mean girls that, and just she couldn't deal with it. But this sport she's actually passionate about. And So the issue now for us is the coach. She is very capable of playing. She was interviewed by 4 coaches and told that, you know, she's a good player. And then when she gets on the team with the JV coach, the woman is very dismissive of her. And she had her last year, and we tried to talk to them, but they said, well, this is like a no parent zone. She needs to. So we tried, you know, we were shut down essentially. So this year we're like, okay, we'll ride it out. We'll see if it gets better. She made the team again. She was dismissed and almost benched. Like, she was a starter for a while, and then she'd make one error and she'd get pulled out. And other girls can make million errors, and she doesn't give any feedback or direction. So there's no real reason for, except embarrassment, that she's pulling her out. And then when I told my daughter, I need you to go have a conversation with her about, you know, remind her you had a stroke and that you need some things, you know. So my daughter went up to her and she literally told her that, I know you had a stroke. I remember that. And that's why I sit you on the bench, so that it's good for you. And she tried to manipulate her into saying that that was a good thing for her. And so now we are just livid because we now know that that's what the coach thinks. So I wondered, from a different perspective, legally, what kind of action can we take? What resources do we have? Because I feel like that I know this isn't right. She's on an IEP, so she has accommodations and she has rights.
Yeah, I'll start with that. I'm certainly not a lawyer, so don't take anything that I say in that sense. I'm not an expert in Section 504 or the IDEA or any of that. But it sounds to me like you're in a situation where it would be appropriate and advantageous to talk with either the principal or the athletic director to see if you can get the coach to provide some, or get them to provide the coach with a little bit of guidance. And I'd say, you know, save your legal arguments or any 504 or whatever for those administrators, rather than for the coach. And I agree that you probably don't want to have the parent intervening with the coach directly unless the coach invites that. The coaches are going to have their own boundaries. But it's very appropriate that you go and have a conversation with the principal or the athletic director.
I'll just add, from a recent 504 meeting that I was at for my 14-year-old child, we had a line written into the 504 plan about athletics and gym class. So the 504, as the link I included from Joe, applies beyond the classroom. It applies to the life of the school, the life of the child in the school context. So that's on the athletic field, in the gym class. And our vice principal knew that. So the principals, the vice principals, and the athletic directors should know that. And if not, you can share that link with them and say, I'd like to have a conversation about this and how to get this formally into the IEP or the 504, and then see, you'll be able to share this recording with the school as well. So you might get, raise the bar on the education that coaching team has.
And it's good timing too, because we have an IEP meeting next Wednesday, so it's perfect timing.
Melanie, I have a question and then a comment, I think. I think I heard you say she was on the JV. Is that accurate?
Yes.
So one of the questions I would ask is, in my particular, I coach high school girls soccer, right? And I have a varsity, a JV, and a freshman program. And I have clearly delineated to my players and parents what those 3 stages of development are. Freshman players, we play equal playing time. Junior varsity, everyone plays, but it may not be equal. Varsity, the best team's going to play. And that's a clearly delineated, and that's what the school requires of me, if you like. Or they don't require it of me, but that's my delineation. You don't have to play your freshman, you don't have to play your JV, but that's my philosophy. And so I would start with that as well, because I think you might, I mean, it sounds like the coach is just inappropriate and mean, and I'm with Joe on that one. I think you have a very good case there on many levels, but it will be a difficult fight if the school's philosophy is varsity best athletes play, JV best athletes play, freshman best athletes play, because the coach always has a stand behind, well, she's just not good enough. And that's a tough one to fight. She's not good enough. She's not good enough. regardless of her situation. I mean, we disagree, and I would find time for her if she were my athlete, because that's just who we are. Not everybody's like us. Unfortunately, people are just not always like us. But for me, I would definitely, the vast majority of JV programs, I believe, should be predicated on everybody getting some playing time and playing and feeling a part of the program. Otherwise, why, what's the point? The idea is to serve ultimately the varsity in high school. And to me, athletes come from different places. Shay's a great example of an athlete who was as a JV player was okay, great. As a varsity player, he excelled. Why? Because he worked hard in these JV programs. He didn't necessarily have to bubble to the surface. And there are so many stories of JV players that are touted as being the best to come, and they're not. Your daughter could well be a gem in the rough there as an athlete for the varsity, but they're not polished in that gem right now. I would ask that question along with all the other questions that you're going to ask as to whether or not there's a school philosophy. And if there's a school philosophy that JV is a participation level sport, then hey, my kid's not participating. That's a philosophical thing as well as anything else.
We already know the answer to that, and it is that it's just how you said it, like varsity, but it's also subjective. And I have a ton of footage. I sit and videotape everything, and so I'm literally sitting down and writing the stats now of my daughter and how many mistakes she can have, 1 or 2, and then she gets pulled, and then I counted up to 11 on the libero, who got promoted to varsity but isn't good enough to actually play on varsity, so she's the libero for the JV. So there's a lot of politics and garbage behind all of it, but I guess we're getting ready to battle this thing out with them, and I just didn't know if anyone had any resources that would be a good thing to know about.
So you hit the nail on the head there when you talked about it being subjective, but it sounds a lot to me. I mean, the conversation about I sit you on the bench because you had a stroke, that to me is just inappropriate and weird.
Right.
And I think that's where I think Joe's advice is pertinent, which is it's an inappropriate statement. I mean,
it's not just inappropriate, it's discrimination. At the end of the day, it is ADA.
Against the law.
ADA, it's against the law. Breaks ADA by saying that. If she had said she sits on the bench because she's not good enough, coach gets away with anything. But because she referenced stroke, you have a very viable case for making a claim against an ADA claim. And the school would be smart to just get rid of the coach, because that just ends anything. So
yes.
Sorry to interrupt you, Dad, but yeah, no, it's
you're good.
Not just inappropriate. You got to think right terminology. It is discrimination.
Right.
I continue to be destroyed by what I hear sometimes. It's just, I'm so sorry for your daughter, and I think that I'm glad that you advocate. I think you've got it in perspective. I would say this though: do not focus on anyone. The moment you bring in the ability of other people, don't do that. I wouldn't do that. I would just focus on your kid's ability and what you think your kid can do. But once you start comparing them to other people, I think that's a tough one to. I would stay with your own daughter's ability rather than comparing to other people. Hey, my daughter's good enough, and she's good enough regardless of her situation. She's not getting an opportunity. It would appear because you think she's had a stroke. Hey, let her work out that she's going to fall over. Let her work out that she's got to battle harder, but give her an opportunity. Stay away from other people's kids.
Thank you.
Maya, you put a comment in the chat. Is there something you wanted to share more about that, or?
Oh, no, not really. I always find these Zooms to be really helpful for me with my kid, as he has struggled with everything from bike riding to swimming. And so it's really taught me a lot about, as he had his stroke at age 2, about what he is going through and what he feels in his body. And he loves, since now he's 14, he loves to work out. He loves gymnastics, which he's been doing for 2 years. He just started rock climbing, which he loves. I do wish we haven't found any other kids like him doing the things that he's doing. So I've talked to him about maybe there's a way to start a group to see if we can find others. But right now he's in on a rock climbing team, and he tells the coaches, who are all lovely, what about the hemiplegia, the right-sided hemiplegia that he has. Yes.
Maya, I'd love to jump in here, Maya. Send him to our CP soccer camp. He can be our statistician on the side. We have kids who don't even kick a ball straight for the entire week, and we find a home for them. There's a home for everybody in a CP camp somewhere, or go to a CHASA event. You know, you are spot on. If you talk to Shay, the first time Shay was around a significant number of people with CP was when he was 13, and it was a pivotal moment in his life, and he could speak to that better than I can. But you are right. You are on the money. That he doesn't have a lot of people like him around him, and I do think that that's incumbent upon you to find a place for him to spend a week with people like him. We did our first camp at Clemson 7 years ago, and we did a post-camp interview, and we assumed every kid would talk about the camp, the food, the whatever. Every single kid, bar none, 17 kids out of 17, led with the same thing, and they didn't communicate to each other. They said the same thing. It was really nice to have a week off from having CP because everybody was just like me. And it made us cry once again. I'm a crier. And it blew us away that they weren't focused on the food at Clemson. They weren't focused on the soccer. That was irrelevant. What was relevant to them was having a twisted arm, having a limp, having a speech impediment was not important that week. And they got a week off from that. So find a place for him to be with a bunch of CP kids. We have a good time. And he's very welcome at our camp. And we'll put him to work. We'll find a way for him to be involved. He doesn't have to kick a ball if he doesn't care. He can carry bags. He can do whatever the heck he wants. We have a good time.
Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah, he had wanted to. I had made him be manager of the basketball team at his school, which he ended up loving. And then he would keep score, and he loved all that. But
and I will say this: so my shameless CP plug, the way we operate, because I never pretend to know anybody's financial situation, is you pay to come to camp. If you can't afford to pay, you ask, and we give. Money is not a reason for not to come to our camp, because we don't. If you can't afford it, we'll pay for it for you. So finances are not a reason not to come to our camp.
thank you.
So I have a question for Shay, and then I want to take Jane's question or comment. So I know about CP soccer camp, and I know that one of the things that happens is that Shay and some of the other young adults lead a conversation amongst the campers. And now it's split up by age because there's a large enough camp population. But maybe share a little bit about that and how you as a young adult are supporting the identity formation of the campers.
Yes. So as Mara touched on, we have what we call our circle or share, whatever, we have tons of names for it, but essentially on one of the last nights of camp, because we like to give everyone at least a few days to meet each other if they haven't met before, interact with each other if they haven't interacted before, and form some relationships. And then in one of the evenings, we all gather this past year, because we were so actually, I think it was past 2 years, because we have such large numbers, we split by age group. So the younger group goes off and speaks in one location. Eli facilitates that group, and with the older, because it's important to have an adult in the room for that conversation. And the older group, I facilitate. I do my best to facilitate, and we aim to have all members present have cerebral palsy, stroke, or TBI. So the only people present in the room are people who understand what it is like to live with cerebral palsy, stroke, or TBI. And it's an open forum. It's a completely open forum. I sometimes will throw out a question, actually this past one was hailed as one of our best ones, which I led with just the question of, what do you like about CP soccer? And it evolves or devolves, however you want to say it, to each individual sharing about their experience with cerebral palsy, with experience with stroke. And sometimes we'll get other athletes or people will ask questions such as, hey, I'm going into high school next year. What did you guys do when you went into high school? Were you nervous? Were you scared, or whatever else? And I never name names, because typically what we say in the circle stays in the circle. I'll only share whatever I've shared, or anything I do share, I won't put names to it. And the other athletes will step up and share. The other athletes will step up and say, hey, I do it this way, or this happened to me. This could happen to you. This is what you're likely to experience. And for the most part, you'll see a lot of heads nodding along. You'll hear a couple of chuckles going, that happened to me. I distinctly remember again, I'm not going to say names. In this past share, someone said a comment about their arm. I don't even remember what the comment was, but that wasn't the important thing about the comment. The response from the two quietest members of camp, both out loud, just shouting, "That happens to me too." This person doesn't let out a pipsqueak all week, doesn't say anything all week. Kind of stays to their own, has a couple buddies that they're close with, but just the most animated I'd ever seen before. Just go, "That happens to me too. I know what that's like." And just shouts across the room. We're all here for it. We're all here for the sharing. So to sum up, essentially, the importance of having a community of people that you can learn from, bounce things off of, bounce ideas off of, share experiences with, learn from, all the above is so important. And that's why I encourage anyone that's of age to go to CP soccer camp, because it is just beyond special. Shameless plug, but it's a worthwhile plug, because that experience alone makes camp by far and away worth it.
I think it's important to share, Shay. We spend 4 hours of 24 hours on the field. So we have 20 hours a day, of which we sleep 8. So we have 12 hours a day that we're not doing soccer. And in those times, we're having food together, we're eating together, we're talking together, we're doing other things. It's called soccer camp because that's the vehicle. And again, there are other camps out there. I think the crucial element is get your kid around other kids with CP, because they're the best self-teachers.
Yeah. So I'm gonna call on Jane, and I just want to name this topic because it was part of how we composed this session. So this session was about high school athletes with physical disabilities, and I think it's important to clarify what Special Olympics is, and Jane knows that it's different, and also what unified athletics is at the high school level, because that's also different and more closely aligned to Special Olympics. So let's hear Jane's question, and we can hopefully answer it or address it.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I just thought I had such a great team of resources here. My son is 27 and he had a perinatal stroke with CP and also is legally blind as a result of it. And, because of his age, there wasn't as much available in terms of integrated sports and that. And so he really grew up on Special Olympics or special people the YMCA hired to, have them do some athletics. And, he's in Plymouth, Massachusetts now. And I find there's a lot of these young adults that really need to be involved in sports as an important recreational outlet. And I don't know, even Special Olympics, I don't think they do a very good job of everything everyone's talking about today in terms of understanding their limitations and how to help them to do that sport or choose the right sport. And I don't know if there's any resources that are available, for these young adults out in the Plymouth area to help to get them moving.
So one recommendation would be speak to the Massachusetts if soccer is an option, and again, soccer is a loose term for top soccer, but there's a program TOPSOCCER, Top Soccer, that is an option, and that would be provided via Massachusetts. Any club that's local to Plymouth is likely to have a tops group, and if you need to contact the club locally in Plymouth, then I would speak initially with Massachusetts Youth Soccer Association. They're easily traceable. Massachusetts Youth Soccer Association. There's a brain teaser for you. And then if there's likely to be a team in the area that offers a top soccer program, and that's a fun program to get them out and moving. And they take adults through kids.
There is a pretty robust top soccer, and if you look it up online, there's a whole list of all the different contacts for each individual town, and then there's sort of an overarching group as well.
And they're great. They're terrific.
Thank you. And they would take the time for a legally blind participant?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Almost every athlete in top soccer is one-on-one. So whether they're
Okay.
blind or whatever they have, whatever disability the athlete may have, they're pretty
Okay.
much one-on-one volunteers, and they have a lot of most all of them have teenage kids that volunteer from the local youth programs, or just really good people. And certainly Legally Blind one-on-one. I actually had twice in the last 4 months had the good fortune to hang out and play with blind soccer players. And that's a thrill, to be honest with you. And for a blind athlete, then if you're not familiar with the rattle ball that blind athletes use,
Yeah.
you can, if you do,
Yeah.
if you have one, take it with you. If you don't have one, touch base with us and we'll
Right.
get you
And
one.
he's legally blind, not blind. So
Yeah, but the rattle balls are still really cool.
yeah, still helpful. Thank you.
Jane, do you have one or not? If not, I can help you get one.
Well, he's not actually at home. He's in Plymouth and I'm in Connecticut. And yeah, I mean, those are the sort of things I'm talking about that Special Olympics doesn't really do. And I will buy them and I'll say, can you use this? But then it doesn't really happen.
Got it.
If you go to Top Soccer, they specifically they'll either have a rattle
Yeah.
ball or they'll get one for him to do Top Soccer for sure. And if they
Okay.
don't, I have grant money if you need it. If they want, I mean, it's a $30 ball. So if they won't buy it, then I trust me, I can find someone that will.
Thank you. That I'm definitely going to follow up on them. Thank you.
Brian, did you want to direct a question to anyone or to the group?
No, this is amazing. I think I apologize. I've been kind of back and forth, so I hope I'm not asking something that was already brought up. But what's your guys' impression in terms of like drive? I think from 7th, 8th through 9th grade, one of the biggest things that I see is that kids are involved, they're excited about playing, and then they find the competition is increasing. They're struggling to keep up, and often a lot of these adaptive programs are hard to get to. They're localized in one area of the city. It's hard to get a mass group of folks to play locally and between school and all the other things that they're doing. It just sometimes doesn't fit into the schedules to travel a distance. I think, Shay, I'd love to hear your input on like how to kind of keep that drive as you're going through and maybe having a little bit more difficulty keeping up with the town soccer, and where that transition happens from competing with the town soccer to maybe more on the para side and that type of thing.
Yeah. So great question. There's a number of things to consider when you're thinking of drive and all the and commitment and all that. You have to look at it from a couple different angles. I'll start with the angle of the player wants to play at the highest level. For example, make the Paralympic team or make the national team or whatever. For that drive has to come from the individual, and it has to be greater than just loving the game. It has to be, because unfortunately it takes a lot. It takes a lot physically, it takes a lot mentally. You're going to be in a lot of pain. I'm very sore right now. I had practice this morning at 6:30 to 8 a.m. and then I had an 8:30 to 9:30 gym session. I mean, to play at the highest level and to be at the highest level physically for an athlete with a disability, just like an athlete with an able body, it's a lot. And in all honesty, those individuals will stand out. I'm not trying to put myself up on a pedestal, but I'll use my teammates as examples of incredible athletes, and athletes in the Paralympics. They're just as capable as able-bodied athletes. And I like to say their drive, if not for their disability, would put them in the able-bodied Olympics, or the U.S. men's national team without the men's team that's playing in the World Cup in 2 years. So the drive, it is a certain special number of individuals that will play at the elite level. Now, if you're talking about just continuing to be involved in sport, then the number one thing to focus on is love of the game, love of the sport. Making sure that you can provide something or find a way to keep the athlete engaged in the sport, loving the sport, finding what they enjoyed about the sport in the first place and keeping that consistent. So for example, one thing that we do as CP Soccer is, because and my dad will definitely harp on this as well and agree with me, is almost every kid at a young age, all they want to do is score a goal. They just want to score goals, score goals, score goals. So we make sure at every single practice, we have some sort of goal scoring opportunity. whether it's just free shooting, we have multiple goals, multiple targets. When we were on Zoom back in 2020 and people didn't have access to goals or fields or anything, we would say, whatever you hit, that's your target. Pick a wall, that's your target. Pick this, that's your target. Just keeping them engaged and keeping them loving the sport, because that's how you foster drive. And even though things get very, very competitive, for me, I sat on the bench for years and years and years. Now, granted, I wanted to be the best player and I had that different level of drive, but I still loved the game. I loved going to practice. I loved being involved around the team. So making sure they're in a positive environment with great teammates. I had incredible teammates growing up. I had a tough coach who didn't give me anything. My dad, who didn't give me anything. It was, I had to earn it all. But at the same time, he still found a way for me to love the game. So fostering a love for the game, fostering, and I'm speaking game because of soccer, but this could be any sport. I saw rock climbing and gymnastics, making sure that you foster a love for what you're doing. It's the only way that you can really keep the drive and competitiveness.
Brian, I would also add this: awareness, awareness, awareness. We have fought hard. Shay didn't like it, but I was loud and proud about Shay's disability, and only until he embraced it at 13 did that our coming together be a better thing. But I think it is really important to let the teammates of kids know that, hey, Pete does have cerebral palsy. Again, referring back to, I think it's Melanie with the volleyball, the basketball, whatever we were talking about. Kids are still mean, and unfortunately, that's tough. And there's definitely that need to prepare them mentally. But I think awareness is everything. And I don't like to be surprised when I run a camp and they tell me the kid, has autism or whatever. Tell me, I'll work with them. I'll find a way to do it, or whatever. And I think most coaches would rather know than not know. And some parents think, well, if I tell them, then they'll discriminate. And we clearly have a case of that here with the poor kid who's got volleyball and the coach is being an idiot. But most coaches are not like that. Most coaches want to know. And if they do know, they'll help. And I think that helps too. But I think going back to your primary question is, how do we find program? How do we keep the love of the game? I think, like I say, awareness. And the other thing that a lot of kids struggle with, we've got a kid who's down at South Carolina University right now, is he's been declined by a lot of the different teams, is he's just lonely. And I think, unfortunately, kids get ostracized when they have a disability somewhat. And so I think the sport's a pinnacle of a certain part of their life. Ensuring that they have a broad friendship base is important too. And that's, a lot of people don't focus on that. If they've got at least one or two good go-to friends, that's an important part of it too. Just on that base of kids, even with CP, you limp, your arm looks different. Kids don't gravitate naturally to those kind of kids, other than in a be nice to them because they have to be nice to them. So I think as parents here, we focused on the broad base of Shay having friends, and then the sport was another part of that.
I also want to piggyback off of that last little bit that you said, because it's very important, and something that I truly believe, because I heard this quote, and excuse my somewhat inappropriate language for this next quote. It is, your disability or situation does not give you the right to be an asshole. And I heard that and I went, yeah, that makes sense, right? People can be upset with their situation. People can be upset with many different things, but it doesn't give you the right to be mean to people. And as my dad said, people are going to look at someone differently. They are going to experience things differently. So they be a nice person, be pleasant to be around. There's some kids at CP soccer who are beyond pleasant to be around. And there's some kids at CP soccer who aren't always the best to be around. I mean, we understand kids are growing up, they're developing and things like that. So teaching kids just, hey, if you're a nice person, people will like you. People will want to spend time with you, and people will want to interact with you. So obviously everyone always says, oh yeah, no, just teach them to be a nice person. But really, 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 just be a nice person. Just be nice.
I want to ask another question about recovery, and maybe Jen, I'll ask you that first, and then Shay, I'd love to have you and Joe speak to that. So there's a lot of emphasis on the training, and particularly the intensive training. How do you build in recovery? How do you do intentional recovery to keep your body in good shape?
Yeah, I mean, I think I sort of touched on this before, but one thing we like to tell folks is that the CNS is very, very needy, right? It's very demanding of calories in and hydration and rest. And so for all intents and purposes, if you've have CP, you've had a stroke, you've had anything like that, your central nervous system, right, is what we would call more vulnerable because it's had a hit to it at some point in your existence. And so we need to think about ratcheting up the things that we do to provide that needy central nervous system. I always tell people, like, you know, if you, for our able-bodied individuals, you probably feel when you're tired, you have a little bit harder time finding the words, or maybe you're a little bit more clumsy, right? So now magnify that to someone who has a vulnerable CNS, and we need to make sure that we're taking care of it. And so extra rest, extra calories. Funny enough, we don't encourage our athletes to eat nearly enough. And when your CNS is needy, your brain and your spinal cord, you need even more than that. I think for a lot of athletes with neuro vulnerabilities, they need more rest often in the midst of their workout or training. Around something like doing, shuttle sprints, building in a minute or two of rest to actually let everything settle down can help them kind of have a greater capacity. It's different for everyone, but building rest into training becomes a bit more important, which I understand is hard. Like Shay was saying, had to sort of advocate, like, I can't do 2-a-days. And it's not a fitness level. It's like that just capacity from the limitation. So making sure there's adequate rest intake, breaks between activity or breaks within them. And that's a lot of individualized learning because it is a bit different for everyone. Hope that helps.
Yeah, and I'll love everything about it. I'm going to piggyback as well off of that, just from the athlete side of things, is a few things to remember are patience. If your athlete wants to sleep in a little extra, let them, because sleep is so important. I remember there's certain days where I just have a long day and I'll sleep for 12 plus hours, right? It's just, you need to recognize that they do have differences. They do have limitations, and allowing your athlete or student or child to sleep is so important. And I had an example today where in my gym workout towards the end, I had just finished on the treadmill and I was going to do a lift movement, and I recognized the difference between me being physically fatigued and tired and out of breath versus I could feel my brain fizzing, and the simple movement of picking a weight up, putting it on my shoulder, picking a weight up and squatting seemed like I was climbing Mount Everest. And just recognizing the differences between, all right, this is a fitness limitation versus this is a CNS, cerebral palsy, whatever else limitation, where it's like, all right, I need a second. And how do we work around that with our training to limit those breaks, to limit those stops so that it can be continuous and not so startup. And also recognizing that we need more recovery, right? I mean, I know Jenna talked about it. We need more recovery than anyone else. I have a foam roller in the other room. I invested in Normatec boots a few years ago, and I use those all the time when we have training camp and we have 2-a-days and we have athletic things. The training room is always full because it's a bunch of athletes with cerebral palsy, all sore, all tired, using foam rollers, using assistive equipment, using all different types of stuff. And you can find cheap equipment as well. Again, if cost is an issue, not assuming anyone's financial situation, you can find cheap equipment. My foam roller is $4 from Aldi. I mean, and it works. You can get a tennis ball. You can get things that are that you would typically have around the house to use as recovery equipment. And just remembering, Mara just put a great. They're a little expensive, the Normatecs. Again, I had a grant that I used to be able to purchase those. But just really recognizing, hey, listen, we need more recovery than the average athlete. And if you see famous influencers online or famous athletes online saying, yeah, no, I spend 3 hours of recovery a day. Well, if you're a disabled athlete or if you're an athlete with a disability, you need 6, you need 9, and it's just plenty more. So,
I'd also like to speak to that as well with Shay. What I think is also a strong recommendation is if you can make a family event of stretching, that to me is also a great thing. I wasn't very good at it, but Shay's mom was really good at, and Shay and mom and the other kids, they always did a lot of stretching. And if you've got time at home to do stretching with your kid, we've incorporated stretching into the very specific PT. We learn from the best. We learn from PTs what a CP kid goes through at a PT session, and we don't do normal soccer stretches. We do what they would do at PT as a free shot at a free PT session. And you should take time to learn that too. I'm sure you do. I'm sure most of you sit at PT hour upon hour upon hour, and then find ways to do that at home in a fun way. We did it at home a lot because I can't tell you how important it is to do stretching at home as well. And as much as it's painful and sometimes that, your kid doesn't necessarily want to do it, if there's a way to make it fun, do it. We also have educated many, many soccer coaches on how to incorporate PT into their stretch routines. At the annual general meeting this weekend, I convinced US Soccer to allow me to do a soccer clinic in front of the 500 members of US Soccer that were there. And we did that. And Shea front and center showed every coach how to do a stretching routine. We've actually just gotten a grant money to write a training manual. There are 0 training manuals for coaches with disabilities at US Soccer. We're about to write that. And one of the front and center things will be how you incorporate specific CP stretching into your soccer training program. And I argue that that's not just about being at a soccer practice, that's about being everywhere. And I love to hear Jenna speak because she's so knowledgeable.
Oh, stop.
Definitely chase up with her on her stuff as well.
I
And
want to
actually-
add in as sorry.
Yeah, well, let me jump in. One more thing I wanted to say about recovery that I often use as a tool to help people just talk about it. When you think about when your phone's battery is draining and it gets into the red, it's a lot harder to get it back to fully charged. And when we think again about that vulnerable CNS, that vulnerable system, we want to be mindful of not letting the battery get into red, because that recharge status time takes so much longer. So I tell kids to kind of think about their battery pack, like we don't want to go red. If we're in yellow, we need to find time to recover.
Yes, that was one of the things I wanted to mention, where it's like, hey, listen, you can't. Also, something I learned is you can't overtrain, because if you overtrain, then you're burnt out for 3 days. And I learned that the hard way many times of overtraining. But the other thing that I wanted to talk about was kind of going off what my dad said about incorporating it into everyday life as well. So for example, and I thank you very much, Jordan, for the comment on the videos. I try to post Instagram videos and help videos as often as I can. Took a little social media break for the past few months, but back to it now. But one video that I made about stretching was that you can do it anywhere. You can stretch watching TV. You can stretch brushing your teeth. You can stretch just finding little 5-minute pockets where it's like, oh yeah, I could do a little calf stretch right now for 5 minutes, or when you're brushing your teeth, 2 minutes. Oh, you can stand in a calf stretch while you're brushing your teeth. When you're watching TV, my mom would always say, hey, if you're going to watch TV, every commercial break, you need to stretch for 2 minutes. And while I was watching SpongeBob, I was stretching. So I was enjoying it, and I wasn't thinking too much of it. I would sit on the floor and be in a stretch. So just finding different ways to incorporate it into everyday life, so it doesn't seem like it's something you have to do. It's something you get to do. It's something that you can almost look forward to, or just do it every day.
Thanks so much, everybody. We're at 1:30, so I think we're gonna let our generous speakers go, and we'll look forward to seeing you for our upcoming sessions, and we'll post this recording within the week. Thanks again. Have a great weekend.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Mara.
Mara. I put my name and phone number and email in the chat if anybody wants to connect. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.